fifth time I've tried to record this review because it just goes off the rails. We are talking The Devil Conspiracy, directed by Nathan Franowski, and this is a bizarre movie. It is a fantasy, horror, science fiction, comedy, action film. Now, how to describe the tone of this movie: take 2 parts Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1 part Bless the Child, 1 part James Bond, and 1 part Big Trouble in Little China. Swoosh that all up and bam, you've got The Devil Conspiracy. What's the story? Boy, where to start with this one? The broad strokes of this story, it focuses on the satanic cult who have managed to find a way to recreate humans based on long dead DNA, and they've done it to a few characters in history like Mozart and things like this. And they've essentially sold these kind of like babies off to be the next kind of big thing to various kind of rich people to finance their ultimate goal, which is to steal the Shroud of Turin and use the DNA within that to clone a baby of Jesus, and then essentially get the devil to possess that baby, thus bringing about the AntiChrist. Now, we have this woman who's a kind of an artist, kind of gets mixed up in it, and ultimately becomes a kind of the surrogate mother. And on our heroic side, we have the Archangel Michael, who possesses the body of a dead, recently murdered priest to try and save the day. And that is the very, very short, truncated version. Very short, truncated version, because there's a lot going on in this movie. This film really feels like a comic book, an adult comic book, with lots of swearing, lots of violence, lots of people getting cut in half, but it's done in that comic book style. That's why I kind of liken it to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And also say, if you think about back to Big Trouble in Little China, that has lots of fantastical elements. It's kind of funny at times, but you've kind of got a kind of a reluctant hero with a fantastical but kind of like you go along for the ride kind of storyline. Like this, it has those elements in there. It's clearly influenced by many different influences. The Satanists seem to have this like Bond villain kind of like hideout in the mountains where apparently the devil was kicked out of heaven and smashed into earth to go down to hell, and that's where they've built this massive fortress which has got super high-tech security and lots of kind of like henchmen and things like this. There's tons going on. Okay, so let's talk about what works. This is going to be a movie for a certain audience. It feels like a schlocky, high production kind of B movie in a way. I mean, visually speaking, you can't take away there are some great production designs. I mean, we have like for example Michael, the Archangel Michael. We see him in his kind of true form before he kind of possesses the body of this priest. I got to say, it looks great. The design here, played by I think it's Peter Mensch, the actor called. It was from Spartacus, Blood and the Sand, but he looks cool. But there's some great visual with these kind of demons. We see kind of hell, and there's lots of kind of theology ideas here. I wouldn't say this movie is ever really scary. It plays more like a fantasy film, but there's certainly some kind of like supernatural, kind of demonic stuff here. Even our human characters, I think the design work here and the production and the kind of the costuming are all quite fab. And we have this. For example, the leader of this satanic cult is this woman, this older woman, who looks like a cross between a fetish dominatrix and a kind of like fashion model, like Donatella Versace or something like that. I mean, it's great. I kind of thought the production design here was like quite quite out there and quite kind of fun and interesting and stuff. And as I say, we do get some kind of stylized kind of violence. One thing I will say, this movie, it is fast paced. I mean, there's so much story packed in here. We've got, for example, the Archangel Michael. We're introduced to him in his kind of like angel form. Then he kind of takes over the body of this dead priest who we're barely kind of like introduced to. And now we find out, you know, he's controlling the body of the priest, but he doesn't really know about modern society, and he's a bit of fish out of water. He doesn't know what a gun does, but somehow he can drive a car. So yeah, there's a few kind of nitpicks and things like that, but he's got to go off and kind of save the day, etc., etc. You know, it's lots going on, basically. So much so, in fact, that we have time jumps to kind of like just kind of get rid of the boring stuff, you know. So very kind of fast-paced movie, high production design, lots of kind of action sequences, lots of kind of VFX on screen, some of which don't look brilliant. I've said there are some kind of CGI here that you feel like they've just stretched it out a little bit too much, and the budget can't quite cope, or the time allotted to making these production wasn't quite long enough. But yeah, visually speaking, it's very interesting. It's very kind of fast-paced. I enjoyed the production design. I enjoyed the things like the costuming and stuff like that. And it's so over the top and schlocky, you can't help but kind of enjoy certain degrees of it, especially if you're a fan of kind of B-movies and kind of those properties that I've mentioned. What doesn't work, it buckles a little bit under its own weight. It's trying to shove so much in there. You feel like some of the kind of the stuff here is barely kind of you know, scratch the surface and stuff. Like I say, you barely really know the kind of the priest before he's kind of murdered and taken over by Michael. You don't really know who this woman is and how come she's kind of allowed in this hotel, or this not hotel, this museum, to just sketch overnight without holding this Shroud of Turin, which is like super secure enough. No, but she's fine to just hang around and stay. Whatever, just going on. We don't know why these Satanists have got this like Bond villain level kind of hideout, complete with kind of like goon henchmen and high-tech gadgets and all of this, and no one seems to know that they're there, stuff like that. Doesn't matter. So it's a little bit silly, to be honest. I mean, if you're looking at a serious kind of horror film, yeah, it's kind of a little bit silly. Because of the tone of it, you never really feel like this is truly a horror film, even though it's certainly about demons and angels and, you know, Satan trying to kind of like have a kind of second coming and all of this. It never really ever kind of goes into a true horror film. It's much more of a kind of a fantasy sci-fi. I really thought the idea of cloning these kind of like famous people of history was an interesting idea, and cloning the kind of the DNA from the Shroud of Turin, you know, was a good idea, but it's barely touched on. It's just a kind of a means to an end to kind of get us to kind of the meat of the bones, which is kind of like heroic Michael versus a, you know, castle full of bad guys, and ultimately the kind of the devil himself. So yeah, a lot kind of going on. Some of the visuals, as I said, that they do kind of like feel like they're kind of a little lacking at times. I have to say the acting, I think, is a little bit hit and miss, and I've got to be honest with you, it's kind of more in the miss. And there are huge lapses in logic, and it just kind of seems to just brush over certain kind of plot points and kind of illogical things that kind of don't really make sense. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a loud movie, a fun one, you know. It's a loud, fun movie, but it's kind of like, you know, a little bit not quite as cerebral as maybe some people may be wanting. And I think it does kind of ultimately feel it's tried to do a little bit too much. I think this probably would have been better as a sort of a mini-series or something along the lines of that. Or maybe even kind of 2 movies, I don't know. So it's a wildly uneven film, but it is kind of like almost, I wouldn't say wildly entertaining at the same time, but it's quality-wise, it feels like it does have a lot of misses. So if you want a visual spectacle, if you want a kind of a fantasy kind of adventure, but with kind of strange theological overtones, then check it out. I'll give this one a 5 out of 10. I honestly can't say it's necessarily a good film, but it's certainly an entertaining one, and it certainly does have some moments. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.